Scientology film, the Enron film, the inventor Elizabeth Holmes. His credentials don't stop. And our special treat is our moderator today, journalist, filmmaker, Napa Valley Film Festival board member, the inimitable Michelle Mitchell, whose, again, credentials I would be here all night citing. So I'm going to read you a little bit of a bio that she may or may not have authored. I cannot reveal. Let's just find Michelle Mitchell's bio here. One moment, please. Stand by. Stand by, honored guests. Okay. Here's a little bit about her. Again, this is off the cuff here. Michelle Mitchell is a Murrow Award-winning filmmaker, best known for her nonfiction feature, The Uncondemned. Formerly political anchor for CNN Headline News and an investigative correspondent for Now the Film Lawyers on PBS, Michelle has reported extensively on conflicts and corruption around the world, appropriate, with a 10-year period focused specifically on the Middle East, appropriate, and, fun fact, her favorite bar is the American Colony Hotel in East Jerusalem, and she admits to accidentally dating an arms dealer, but figures you won't hold that against her if she opens a bottle of Chateau Moussard. Without further ado, Michelle Mitchell. And our guest of honor, Gibney.
I love a Q&A where they offer you a glass of wine.
Let me give you some ice. How many glasses? Maybe a glass or two.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you so much. Well, as you, is this on? Are you on? No.
Hello, you want to use mine?
Well, thank you. We will switch off. So Alex and I were talking earlier, and I feel that we need to sign non-disclosure agreements because we've covered a lot of the same stuff. However, we're going to dive right in because I wanted to ask Alex right away about his body of work and the fact that he's done so many films, you guys. He's covered all sorts of folks from Lance Armstrong to Enron to Elizabeth Holmes and, I guess I got to probably get Spitzer on this, and Julius Assange, and now Netanyahu. And I wanted to start with this idea of, is there any umbrella thing that connects them all? Obviously, you're very interested in tracking power, corruption. Is there something about these different personalities that are tied together?
I mean, I get asked that question a lot, and I don't think I set out with a pattern in mind, but I seem to be stirred or angered by abuses of power. And that led me to do a number of the films that I've done. And along the way, I learned an awful lot about corruption, and both financial corruption and also moral corruption, religious corruption, and economic corruption. And so that's what led me originally to want to dig in on this project when I was leaked these police interrogation videos of, that was part of the investigation into the Netanyahu trial.
We're just gonna pass this on. It's like we're an Olympic relay team that's actually gonna win this time, unlike the U.S. And so I'm not gonna actually talk about the gold medal race. That was a sad thing for me.
Where they pass the eye around.
We're gonna do that. The talking stick, actually, this is what this is. We were talking just outside about, one of the continuing themes of your work, which is what is corruption about, the prison of belief. And we were discovering that we both worked on the same story to some degree. If you guys remember the story of Jack Abramoff and the corruption story with him in Capitol Hill, and why people actually do this and why they think they can get away with it.
Well, one of the things that I think about, Jack Abramoff was a disgraced lobbyist who went to prison for a number of years. And I went and visited him in prison. And something that relates to this film was the fact that I noted when I was speaking to Jack in the prison waiting room that I just commented and said, the amounts of money involved in some of these schemes seem pitifully small. He paused and smiled and turned to me and said, Alex, I could buy a congressman with a stereo. I always found that remark kind of chilling. And the point was not that they don't get paid enough. The point was that there was something else beside the money that they were getting out of it, which is this sense of being attended to, the sense that you would offer them something. And after all, they believe, as most of us do, that we're good. And they're trying to do good. And therefore, it can lead to what the police call noble cause corruption, where you believe that because you're good and what you're trying to do is good, you're entitled to a little bit of corruption. Or, in the police context, if you think you're going after a bad guy and you can't get him for the crime that he's committed, you plant some drugs on him. So it was that idea that I think ended up being something that did form a kind of through line through my work, whether it be what goes on in cults in the Church of Scientology, or what somebody like Jeff Skilling at Enron thought, or what Lance Armstrong thought in terms of I do so much good for cancer, so that he could, on the one hand, say with great conviction, how dare you say that I, as a cancer survivor, have ever used performance-enhancing drugs. And they would get off the interview platform and he'd go do a bag of blood just before the race. So that idea, I think, was something that ended up becoming, Elizabeth Holmes, who was somebody who she did nearby here, believed in her mission. So it was okay. So the device didn't work. So she was putting people at risk, but she had a higher cause in mind. So it wasn't okay that she was lying to everybody.
We're talking about this idea of true alibis. So those of you who haven't read Samantha Power's book about genocide and war crimes, she brings up this idea that people in power have a reason to excuse their behavior, which is they're not lying to themselves. They're not lying to themselves if they ignore evidentiary support about something bad happening. They are telling themselves something that they truly believe, so that that's their mechanism to excuse their behavior. And I'm wondering if you think that would apply to what we've just seen in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Bibi, one of the things that's interesting about him is that he was offered a deal. And the deal was that he would never have to spend a day in prison, but he would have to stay out of politics. And he was actually willing to take that deal, but Sarah was not. And so then his sense of, or his need for staying in power became so great that he began to rationalize all sorts of corrupt behavior in order to, and he did so by thinking, look, I am King Bibi, I'm the guy who's done so much for Israel. And you can hear also his wife, Sarah, say in the tapes, like, what are you doing? This man has done so much for Israel, as if to say, what difference does it make if he's corrupt? It's a variation of what my political science professor used to say to me, which is that economic actors are not rational, they're rationalizers, meaning that they figure out ways of coming up with excuses for doing dirty deeds.
I think they gave you one.
Oh, good. It's working.
So, in speaking of Sarah, the story that actually, the last time I was in Israel, there was a huge controversy about Sarah Netanyahu and ice cream. And and I don't know if you guys remember this, but it was in 2013, and I had to look it up again because I wanted to make sure my memory wasn't fading as I get old. And it ends up that this was indeed a thing. She was in a lot of trouble in 2013 for ordering 14 kilograms a month of ice cream. That is 30 pounds of ice cream. I did the math, and that was $3,000 a month. And then, of course, in the movie, it becomes about champagne. And there's this great moment where the investigator is saying to the billionaire, is it easier to run a country with a bottle of champagne? Which I think everyone in this room would say, yes, right? You're in a wine country, so that would be the case. But we're not, that's not wine country. I mean, there was 20 bottles a week that she was supplied, which is extraordinary.
And, it was also instructive too that despite their sense of entitlement and the sense of l'état c'est moi, they came up with a series of code words so that they called them pinks. So it wasn't like they didn't know that it was wrong. They did know it was wrong. They just thought they were entitled to be bad.
Pinks was formerly Chandon Rosé, for those of us in the audience who are champagne alcoholics, and Green Lees for Dom Perignon. So if you read the transcripts, that's what the translation. But if you say in the film, or you don't say, you've got people who say, it starts with the mindset of, quote, I deserve it and I can get away with it.
I think that's right. But ultimately it spins out of control. So that when he's caught, and it is interesting, this dynamic between the police and Netanyahu, or Bibi, versus Sarah and Yair. With Netanyahu, he accepts the idea that he, as the prime minister, can be questioned by the police and can be held there for however long they need him to be held there. Whereas Yair and Sarah are aghast. They're screaming at their interrogators as if, how dare you even think that you have the power or the gumption just because you represent the state and the rule of law to question me, because we are above that. And the contempt with which they treat them is really kind of staggering. Whereas Netanyahu needs to play the game and sort of understand the game, but also the cynicism that is involved with the way he answers the questions. Like, the wonderful montage. I should say, like, I've been talking about this, like, this is my film. I got the tapes, I sought out a director named Alexis Bloom. She's the one who directed the film, but the montage that she puts together where the guy with the greatest memory ever keeps saying over and over and over again, I don't remember, I don't remember, I don't remember. It was interesting last night, I was on a panel, a Q&A, much like this one, with Ben Rhodes, who was in the Obama administration, and had opportunity to be in a number of meetings with Netanyahu. Said that was his experience, was that he would lie to them every time. He would tell them one thing in private session and then go public and say something entirely different. The other interesting story he had to tell, which I'll pass on since I just started tonight, was that when they got to Jerusalem one year and Obama was meeting Netanyahu, Sarah took Ben Rhodes and a number of other people aside and started serving them martinis. And they thought, this is a little bit odd. I mean, normally, in the course of business during a working day, the first lady doesn't start serving you martinis. Not only did she serve them, but she kept topping them up. And so it was like, what is that about? Like, is it just that she needs to make us drunk? Or is it that she needs to show that she's the hostess? Or is this her? Anyway, he found it very strange.
The fact that Sarah and Yair, I agree that their questioning was extremely interesting to watch and very. I mean, I was watching the son, the way that he was reacting, but I kind of thought of him as like a kid who got in trouble at boarding school or something. I was like, what, and, you know, anyway. But what I thought was especially interesting, pivoting away from that family, was the reaction of some of the people who were the hired help, who were brought in for questioning. And I'm specifically thinking of the billionaire's cook. And she has this moment where she says, I felt it was wrong. She's talking about the different favors that were done. I felt it was wrong, but what could I do? And that seems to be a theme that plays out throughout history. I mean, forget the context of the movie. This is something that if you are a student of history, that anything dealing with, I guess we could go ahead and call it an autocrat at this point. I felt it was wrong, but what could I do? That's really seems to me to be a profound moment in the film, and that goes by real.
It goes by really quickly, and it is a chilling moment, but I would also point out too that what's interesting to me about this film is the fact that people like Hadas Klein, who work for Arnon Milchan, and also so many of the commentators in the film agree to speak out, call out the corruption, and to speak out so forcefully at a time when it's not really to their advantage to do so. So it was at once a glimpse, as you say, into the kind of get along and go along that leads to fascism, because you just hope that things will get better and you don't do anything about it. But also, I was really impressed with a number of the folks in the film who did raise their voices. And it's interesting, when Alexis went over there, she went, for this film, she went to Israel 4 times. The first couple of times, most of these people would not speak to her. But as things accelerated, particularly as the carnage and gossip became ever more extreme, they became more willing to talk. So I think the sense of injustice propelled them in a way that was actually somewhat inspiring, considering what we're about to face.
Well, I want to talk for a moment about that courage. We're going to open up for questions really fast, as you know, Sean. And you guys, by the way, some of you who haven't been with me for Q&As, we are wrapping up our little tete-a-tete really fast because I'm opening up for you guys. But when it comes to the issue of courage, which is something that I think a lot about, it takes a lot of courage to speak out. And you're right, they spoke out, and she says that as a chilling moment, but she went on the record with the police. And as in the movie, it is, why do you think that people speak out?
That is a really good question, because it is really hard to do. And to some extent, not only is it hard to do, but it is resented. I will recall from a previous film I did on Enron, called Enron, the Smartest Guys in the Room. When I was going on the press tour for that film, I was always asked 2 questions. One was about this guy, Luke High, who was addicted to strippers and then ended up getting out early because he sold his stock because, he married one of the strippers. So people were fascinated with him. But the other question I would get was about the whistleblower, Sharon Watkins. And the question was always like, who does she think she is? Is she so, holier than thou? I bet she's not that great. I thought, what an odd comment about the woman who was the whistleblower in the Enron case. Why would people be so resentful toward her? And over time I came to learn that, people don't like being embarrassed by others who do the right thing. And so there's tremendous pressure against doing the right thing. So to stand up and do it is very lonely. It's very tough and it's hard, but I think for some people there's a stirring in the gut where it's like, I am not going to, no matter how much money is offered me or how much privilege is offered me, I'm not going to do the wrong thing. It's just too important to me. It's one of the things that's inspiring about us as a species at times when things get very dark.
Well, I'm asked all the time if I self faith in humanity and the stories I've covered, and I always say, oh yeah, I absolutely do. Sean, you have a question?
I have this extraordinary film. Thank you so much. Amazing director. I am since November 5th, it is a very different film than it would have been 2 weeks ago.
I agree.
Clearly, they won. There is no recourse. And I think some of those people should be very fearful of their lives probably, but also just would like you to comment on this cabal of corruption and frankly evil, in my opinion, is now dominating what we used to think as Western democracy.
Yeah, no, it's deeply concerning, and obviously, I've been watching the cuts of this film all the way along, but I hadn't sat and watched the film in its entirety until a few days ago. I think it was Thursday night, and it was the first time I'd seen it after the election, and the parallels really hit me like a ton of bricks. But one of the things that was most terrifying to me was to see in this film the slow motion erosion of the rule of law. And we all take the rule of law for granted, and yes, we like to run red lights and so forth and so on, but when you see how a society knits together by holding everybody to account to the same rule, it becomes a terrifying notion that rule of law might disappear, and that was once a liberal democracy, because democracy itself is tricky, because a lynch mob can be a democracy, but a liberal democracy in which the rights of the minority are protected and where you have a rule of law, when that goes, you're in Al Capone, Chicago. So as we're looking forward in the days ahead, that to me is the thing that is most at risk, and the thing that we must all fight to preserve.
Okay, Kathy. You said you're going to hold the tapes. How?
One day, I looked out of my front lawn now, and I got a call, I got a text on Signal from somebody I didn't recognize, who said, would you be interested in this kind of a thing? And I do get these things from time to time, a lot of the time it's bogus. But in this case, I followed up, I had conversations with the source, and the source said, look, I have these tapes, I have them all. I think they would be of interest. I think you would be able to find a way to get them out there. And there was only one condition. And in this particular case, the condition was that we not officially distribute the film in Israel, because there was a law in Israel, it's actually a privacy law, in which if you're videotaped or audio taped in the midst of an official proceeding, no one can make those tapes public or show them in any kind of commercial way without getting permission of the person who was recorded. And that's a law that can send people to prison. So the source, I can't say anything more about it except that there was a source, said that was my one condition. I accepted the condition, and so, we're not officially distributing the film in Israel, but I got this out of the blue. And I got it, I should add, early to mid 2023, so it was in the midst of the judicial crisis, but October 7th had not yet happened.
You've come very close to real time during the end of this. And I was wondering if you could answer the question. You document very well the ebb and flow of the Israeli populace toward Netanyahu. It was clearly way down in polls and according to public approval. And then, since the assassinations of Sinwar and Nasrallah, it seems, I've heard, that he has increased in the polls and popularity, and there's almost a groundswell now to keep him in office in spite of all of this and the ongoing trial. Can you comment on that? Do you have current up-to-date opinion or knowledge of it?
I best source for a day-to-day, blow-by-blow of the approval ratings of Benjamin Netanyahu. I think that Israel is still very much divided, but I do agree with you that since the death of Sinwar and also some of the initial assaults in Lebanon, his standing has risen. But it's a really complicated situation in Israel because also what you're seeing is a lot of kind of the best and brightest, particularly of the younger generation, leaving the country, going to the United States, going to Germany, going elsewhere. But at the moment, it's a very, very deeply divided country. And that seems to, but it is true that his approval ratings seem to be on the upswing, and also with the election of Trump, there is some sense that he will have, at least for the next 4 years, unrestrained backing from the United States, and that's giving him a sense of standing.
Before I go to this gentleman's question, one of the things that comes up in the film, Alex, is 2 words that come up to describe Netanyahu: hubris and deterioration. I'm curious what you think about those 2 words applying to him, and if there's one that's greater than the other.
I think hubris, in a way, is the more important of the 2. There is deterioration, I think, with Netanyahu, and people point out in the film that, when it comes to alliances with people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, that, a number of years ago he wouldn't have had his picture taken with them, much less form a coalition government with them. That said, there's a book that's just coming out that argues rather persuasively that Netanyahu's goal for a long, long time has been to prevent a 2-state solution. And so, in many ways, he had a kind of commonality of interest with Sinwar, which we don't think of. We think of, oh, we really got Sinwar. But Sinwar and Netanyahu both wanted the same thing, which is to avoid a 2-state solution, both for wildly different reasons. And so I think that, at least in terms of what he wanted as the policy for Israel, I'm not sure it was a deterioration, though I think the deterioration that has taken place is kind of moral deterioration, because it really beggars belief, the idea that somebody, in order to forestall being held to account for smoking too many cigars and buying over and getting gifts of too much champagne for his wife, would rapaciously kill tens of thousands of people in order to keep a war going. And when we say war, right, I mean, if I may for a second, there's no, I hold no grief for Hamas or what was done by Hamas on October 7th. It was vicious and brutal. It's a war crime. But the prosecution of the war in Gaza and its ongoing disregard of human rights is really a staggering crime. So that is a kind of deterioration, a kind of moral deterioration that would enable that kind of carnage just for the sake of personal ambition. That's some kind of deterioration. And I'm a student of corruption, but this is a corruption on a whole other level.
Thank you very much for coming. This is an incredible film you produced. I want to say that first of all. So thank you for coming and talking to us. You made there were some interesting choices in the film that I had some questions about. There's some very graphic content towards the end, and it's something that I'm sure was a difficult decision. Can you talk about the decision process of including that content and how you felt it was needed to be in the film?
I'll go to one image, which I know, again, I didn't direct the film. I produced it, and so these decisions were ultimately in the hands of Alexis. But I do know that there was a lot of debate in the cutting room, for example, about including the image of the shooting dog. It's something that people find to be extremely brutal and upsetting, and I understand it. Like, it is brutal and it is upsetting, as are the images of the bombing and also the firing into cars, and killing of innocent civilians. These images are brutal, and there's no good answer about how much or how little of those images that you include. But I do believe that if you don't include those images, you don't understand or appreciate the horror of what's happening. And so there's always a balance. I'm trying to remember the name of the famous time-life photographer who talked about the photograph she took of the camps at Auschwitz and Treblinka, and wondering which images she could show. And there's a tender line between images that just make the human mind shut off and ones which, provoke a proper sense of outrage because you are literally showing what happened, which sometimes is terribly important. So I think those were I know that Alexis wrestled with it very deeply in the cutting room, and came out at a place where I think she felt was the right balance. I mean, I can endorse this balance, but I do understand how upsetting this image